My name is Aiden Clark, and the book that I did my review on is called Nature's Best Hope by Douglas W. Tallamy. And the reason for getting this book is I wanted to make a difference in my life and in my community, and I would recommend this book for anyone who wants to do the same. I'm going to briefly go through the chapters, and I won't be giving all of the statistics that the author gives. There are a lot of good statistics and numbers and resources, but I'm just going to briefly go through it all. So in chapter 1, the author starts by talking about the dreamers, and the dreamers are people like John Muir, Theodore Roosevelt, David Bauer, James Hansen, and Elizabeth Colbert, as well as many other people. And these people all worked very hard and did a lot of great stuff for their respective fields within the kind of environmental sciences. The two biggest dreamers for the author are Aldo Leopold and Edward O. Wilson, and he goes into depth about why these two are very important to him and why their works were very influential in the book, why he wrote the book and his other works as well. But one of the main points of chapter 1 is that we can make the dreams of these people and our dreams as well come true. So in chapter 2, the author talks about the conservation in general, the roots of conservation, and what the future has for conservation, and then also some missteps in biological conservation that we have taken. There are two primary missteps that he brings up. The first is the assumption that biodiversity and people can't coexist, which it can. We don't want to keep conservation to small parts of the world, just these small national parks related to the entire country or world. It can be very harmful to isolate these communities. And secondly, leaving conservation to the conservationists is also a misstep. The conservationists do a very good job and they're very helpful, but it's a very small community of people. We need more people like me and you, to kind of step up into conservation. Chapter 3, he started talking about the importance of connecting preserves, these nature preserves. The isolation of these nature preserves will lead to endangerment. One example that he gives in the book is the eastern box turtle. If they are isolated into these preserves that aren't connected with each other, they won't be able to survive. And these, like I said, small populations can't handle being isolated like this, and they also can't handle the fluctuations that naturally happens in a population. If the population is too low, and it fluctuates like a wave, then they can't handle it and they'll die out. Another thing is habitat fragmentation, which increases the edge effects, which is like the edge of a forest or tree line, where it's a lot windier and drier than the interior. Something that he brings up in this chapter is that he wants to connect these habitats all together through biological corridors to decrease this fragmentation and isolation. Another thing that he kind of briefly goes through about in chapter 3 is getting away from lawns, and then in chapter 4 he goes more into about shrinking lawns and some challenges that come with this task as well, such as tribalism. People have made lawn the symbol of high status, so everybody else kind of follows that suit, even though it's not best for the environment. And people want to just follow along with that because that's how everybody else is doing it. He brings up changing the culture a bit about this, and a good way to think about this is lawns should be seen as rugs instead of carpet, so just a small section in your room instead of the whole room. In chapter 5, the author brings up the homegrown national park, which is what he calls it, and it's pretty much his dream of what the ideal situation in North America could look like for this national park. It requires effort from landowners everywhere, especially private landowners. It starts at home, and it starts with a passion for nature. People like you and me starting at our house who are interested in nature and have a passion for it. It provides a lot of personal gain as well. Well, you can customize it how you like, and you can get a lot out of it by viewing maybe species that you haven't never seen before that have decided to come to your property. He also brings up that stewardship is very important. And in chapter 6, he talks about rebuilding the carrying capacity, and the carrying capacity is the ability of a particular place to support a specific species. Plants determine the carrying capacity in an environment, and the amount and type of plants is important as well in judging the carrying capacity. Humans have exceeded and degraded the Earth's carrying capacity. I believe in the book it says last time that the Earth's carrying capacity could handle all of the humans' life was back in the 1970s, and we've about doubled the population by then. In chapter 7, he talks about invasive species and how harmful they are. Any invasive plants mostly, and the invasive plants he's talking about are plants outside of North America. And plants that are native to the region perform ecological tasks way better than invasive species plants from Europe or Asia. And invasive species don't have their natural predators like they do in Europe or Asia that keeps them in check, so they kind of get out of control and can kill out all the other native plants in the area. And if they kill out these native plants, there are a lot of specialization plants and animals, which means that these specialization species only work with each other. So maybe one bee that is native to North America will only go for one native plant for pollination. And if that plant dies out, then that bee won't have a place to get any pollen or anything, and they'll leave as well. And pretty much the main thing about chapter 7 is that native plants are just they just do their job better than these invasive species in their native areas. In chapter 8, he started talking about restoring insects, and so insects play a huge role in our entire world, and if we can sustain plants, or the insects sustain plants and animals as well. Two insects that get the spotlight are bees and caterpillars. And caterpillars provide the best nutrition for birds and other animals. And then bees, especially native, are hugely important in pollinating our plants. There are some keystone plants as well, such as the oak, that are powerhouses throughout the country in raising the carrying capacity and caring for these native animals. Again, we need to meet the needs of the specialists, because then the generalists will follow. In chapter 9, he discusses weeds and why weeds are important. So a big problem with weeds is it's kind of like a stigma about them. So plants such as milkweed are very helpful, but just the name weed in their name, it gives them kind of a bad identity, because a weed is labeled as a plant that is out of place, but plants like goldenrod and milkweed are not out of place. They shouldn't be considered weeds. And then in chapter 10, will this work? This idea of conserving in your yard and in your community. Well, nature has proven itself very resilient, but it can only take so much. We can also employ some of the things this book talks about into cities as well, which I thought was very eye-opening. You know, we can also employ some of the stuff in the suburbs. That will be the main goal, but it will be more difficult with homeowners associations and neighbors that don't want native plants or weeds in their neighborhood. But it's still possible to convert your yard into a sanctuary. And it's happening already. The author gives lots of personal stories and stories of people he knows that are succeeding and thriving with this. And then finally, chapter 11 gives a nice summary of all the main points from the chapters in the book. So one of the objectives that this book had is to tell people about what they can do in their yard to help with conservation. The book states that it's a new approach. Right on the front, it says it's a new approach to conservation, and that starts in your yard. Another objective is that it's to bring attention to species that usually don't get the spotlight. Not every species gets the attention that monarch butterflies do or box turtles do, and it's important to know about them and their importance in their environment. I think another objective about the author gives is to give the reader hope in general. In the media, the outlook on conservation and what the individual can do is usually pretty dark and pessimistic, sadly. But the author offers a positive and optimistic point of view on conservation and gives the reader plenty of information to start helping. I also think the author was successful in accomplishing these objectives because I felt very hopeful and informed and excited about conservation that I can contribute to. While I was reading it, I was just already planning out some things that I could do in my yard, and he did a really good job. So what worked? I think that the pictures in the book worked very well. There were many pictures about all that featured all of the different species he was talking about, whether it was plants or insects or animals, and just seeing these pictures of these species really kind of drives home the fact that they are endangered and just how important they are and how beautiful they are, really. Because just mentioning their name really doesn't take the whole effect of it, but actually seeing the faces of the plants and the insects really drove it home. Another thing that the author did well was that they worked well. Another thing the author did that worked well was create a sense of community. A lot of the language he used in the book was what we can do. This is what our problem is, what we can do. It really makes it feel like we're all in this together, which we truly are. And the author, like I mentioned earlier, also included stories from his personal life and stories from everyday people that have success in conservation. And this made it feel like this idea was very doable and achievable. So some of the major themes, one of the major theme in this book was that lawns are very harmful and should be reduced in size. This theme occurs a lot throughout the book and is a very important part of this at-home conservation guide. Another major theme is the removal of invasive species. Invasive species wreak havoc on the native wildlife and plants and animals. And this theme was also frequently brought up throughout the book, and it really cemented the importance of native species. Another major theme is the importance of planting for pollinators, especially native pollinators and specialized pollinators. And this means that getting specialization plants will be important, and the generalists will then follow with the specialization pollinators. There are some other important concepts and themes as well, but those three were the main ones that I saw throughout the entire book. So the intended audience for this book are those who are curious about conservation and looking for ways to make a difference. I felt like I was a part of the intended audience. Most of the things in this book were fairly new knowledge to me, but I thought it was very helpful, and it kind of made me more curious about more knowledge and other things I can find out about conservation and how I can make a difference. So this book put the ideas and thoughts that I had about conservation into concrete. It was very informative and very good at communicating these simple yet complex subjects. This book also gave many statistics with many resources, which I really thought was cool. It also gives the reader resources that will help them with their own research, such as the Native Plant Finder website. And it did a great job at reinforcing my ideas and turning up my thirst for knowledge about conservation in general. It also made me want to act right away. Like I mentioned earlier, I was already planning out how I was going to do like some pocket prairies and stuff in my yard right before I was even done with the book. So yeah, I 100% recommend this book for anyone who's interested in making a difference in their own community, in their own life. It's a great introduction, I think, into personal conservation and what we can do to help. So yeah, thank you.